In this video, I will be explaining how to create major scales using tones, also known as whole steps, and semitones, also known as half steps. Therefore, before watching this video, it's very important that you know and understand the difference between tones and semitones, and understand how to read treble clef notes. If you're not sure on either of the above, have a look at my other videos which cover these topics. Let's start by looking at the simplest of all the major keys, C major. Why is it the easiest? Well, because it starts on the note C, which you can see I've already drawn onto our stave, and all of the following notes, up to the next C, are the white notes from a piano. Here's a piano. So after C, the next white note is D. We add this note to our scale. E comes after D, so let's add that note to our scale. Then F, G, A, then B. Now, the keyboard I'm using on screen is very small. Normally, we'd expect it to extend like this. So in this video, whenever we get to B, we just loop back to the start of the piano. So finally, after the B, we're back to C, and we add this to our scale. And that's it. C major, very simple. Remember, it's all of the white notes from C to C. The scale is called C major for two reasons. Firstly, it starts and ends on C. If a scale is called G major, we'd start and end on G. If it was A major, we'd start and end on A, and so on. Secondly, hidden away in the scale we've drawn is a pattern of tones and semitones. We use the pattern of tones and semitones to calculate all other major scales. Let me explain. We need to work out the distance between each of the notes of our C major scale and state whether each distance is a semitone or a tone to work out this pattern. Now, if you've watched my video on accidentals and semitones, you remember that a semitone is an immediately neighbouring or adjacent note on the piano or keyboard. A tone, however, is two semitones. And in case you're wondering, semitone is also known as half step, whereas a tone is also known as a whole tone. It doesn't really matter which terms you use, but I'll be sticking to tones and semitones throughout this video. So A to A sharp is a semitone, as they are adjacent. A to B, however, is a tone, as it is one semitone from A to A sharp, and then another from A sharp to the B. Do have a look at my video about semitones if you need further help with this. Let's go through each of the notes in our C major scale and work out the distances. Firstly, C to D, which I've highlighted yellow on the C major scale. So, using our piano, C to C sharp is a semitone, and it's then another semitone from C sharp to D. Two semitones equal a tone. I'll pop the letter T, short for tone, between the notes C and D on our scale to remind us of this. So now the distance between D and E, the next two notes of our scale. Here's D on our piano. It's a semitone to D sharp, and then another semitone to E, so two semitones or a tone. I'll pop another T between the notes to remind us that the distance between D and E is a tone. E to F. This is just a semitone in distance, not a tone, as there is no black note in between the E and the F. So I'll pop the letter S for semitone between the E and the F. F to G, two semitones, so a tone in total. The letter T between the two notes. G to A, two semitones, so another tone in total. The letter T between the two notes. A to B, two semitones, so yet another tone in total. Here's the letter T. Finally, B to C. B is at the very end of our piano, so we loop back around to the beginning. There's no black note between B and C, so we can say that the distance apart is a semitone. The letter S completes our list of distances between the notes in a C major scale. Now, this is a very important order of tones and semitones. What you've just worked out is the pattern or formula for every other major scale you will ever come across. I said a moment ago that this scale is called C major for two reasons. Firstly, because it starts and ends on a C. You've just discovered the second reason, this pattern or formula of tones and semitones. It can be used to calculate every other major scale. Let's use this formula to help us calculate G major. I'll pop the formula at the bottom of the screen. Okay, G major. Because it is G major, we start on the note G. We then use our major scale formula to calculate the remaining notes of the scale. We take the first letter of the formula, a T, and this tells us to write a note that is a tone higher than G. Here's G on our piano. G sharp is one semitone higher, A is another. Because A is a tone higher than G, that is our next note of the scale. We add this note to our scale. The next distance in our major scale formula is another tone. So we need to write a note a tone higher than the A we just added to our scale. A sharp is only a semitone higher. Another semitone is B. So the next note of our G major scale is B, a tone higher than A. Let's add that note B to our scale. The next note after the B has to be a semitone higher, as the next letter in our major scale formula is an S. Here's B on our piano. C is a semitone higher, so we add C to our scale. A tone comes next. A tone higher than C is a D. We add this to our scale. Another tone after the D. E is a tone higher than D. We add this to our scale. Another tone after the E. Now, here's E on our piano. E to F is only a semitone. So another semitone brings us to, well, is it F sharp or G flat? This is the first time we've encountered a black note on the piano, and it's important that you understand what happens here. With all major scales, there needs to be one note, and no more than one, on every line and in every space between the first and last notes of the scale. If I were to choose G flat, which I've added to my scale, there would be no note that uses this line, which I've highlighted red. However, if I use the F sharp, there would be. So we must ensure that we use the F sharp to ensure that all lines and spaces are used. Finally, a semitone from F sharp to the G. We add the G to our scale. And here is our G major scale. Let's just recap what we did. Firstly, we started on the note G, as this is G major. We then used the major scale formula of tones and semitones we calculated from C major. We use this order of tones and semitones to help us calculate each note one by one. Before we finish looking at G major, just be aware that we've only drawn the ascending version of G major here, ascending meaning going upwards. Here's the descending version of the scale. You can see that it still starts and ends on a G, but the notes are going downwards, or they are descending. Let's look at another scale that is descending. D major descending. We still tackle this question in exactly the same way as we did a moment ago, but this time we must start on a high D, which I've added to the scale. And we need to remember that we are going down, descending towards the next D. Secondly, we still use this pattern we calculated from C major. However, there is a catch. Because this formula was calculated from C major ascending, it can only be used to calculate ascending scales. To use it for descending scales, we merely reverse the order. So for ascending major scales, we use the order of tones and semitones this way, whereas for descending major scales, we use the order this way. Let's have a go. So we've already put in our starting note, the D. Remembering that we are using the reverse of the major scale formula, we take the S and we use this to calculate the next note of our scale. So here's our piano and the D is already highlighted. A semitone lower, and remember to go lower as we're descending, than D, well, is it D flat or C sharp? If it was D flat, there'd be two notes on this line, which I've highlighted red. Remember, we're only allowed to have one note on each line or in each space. So it must be C sharp. We add this C sharp to our descending scale. The next letter from our major scale formula is a T. We now need to find a tone lower than the C sharp. Here's C sharp on our piano. C is one semitone lower. And if we just temporarily extend our piano, B is two semitones lower. Therefore, we pop in the B onto our stave. Next, a tone lower than B. Here's B on our piano. A tone lower is A. We add this to our scale. Next, a tone lower than A. Here's A on our piano. A tone lower is G. We add the G to our scale. The next note must be a semitone lower than a G. So is F sharp or G flat? If it was G flat, there'd be 2 notes on the red line. As we're not allowed more than 1 note per line or space, the note we need must be F sharp. Let's add that to our scale. A tone lower than F sharp. Here's the F sharp. F sharp to F is a semitone. Another semitone brings us to E. We'll add E to our scale. And finally, a tone lower than E. Here's the E, and a tone lower is D. We add the D to our scale, and here's our completed D major descending scale. So before we finish, a brief recap of how to calculate major scales. Firstly, draw a scale of C major. Remember, it starts on C and contains all of the white notes from C to C. Secondly, calculate the distance between each of the notes in C major using semitones and tones. Thirdly, we use this pattern of semitones and tones to calculate any other major scale, but just remember that the scale starts and ends on the same note. There must be no more than 1 note on any line or in any space. There must always be a note on every line and in every space between the first and last notes of the scale. And finally, when writing descending major scales, reverse the tones and semitones formula which you calculated from C major. Good luck with studying major scales. I do hope this video has been useful to you. Thanks for watching.